Welcome to the World Extreme Medicine podcast. My name is Laura McKenna, and today we'll be talking about the challenges of planning for an unsupported expedition at sea as a doctor. To explore this with me in this episode, I have the pleasure of welcoming Dr. Barry McKenna. He is the doctor for the Forces of Nature team who are soon to start their epic 000km Unsupported Kayak expedition of the Inside Passage from Olympia in Washington state along fjordlands of Western British Columbia to Skagway in Alaska, estimated to take 90 to 100 days from 1st of May to the beginning of August 2023. Barry studied engineering at university, sponsored by the military. Unfortunately, following a few months in hospital paralysed by a condition called Guillain-Barre Syndrome, he went to Headley Court, the Defence Services Medical Rehabilitation Unit. Here, he learned the importance of fitness, his need for adventure, and that physical exercise can be therapeutic. He continued with his studies and spent some time in the army. After leaving the army, he worked for British Aerospace, but took voluntary redundancy after a few years to go to medical school in London. Since qualifying, he has spent 24 years in emergency medicine and general practice and is now a full-time GP in Devon. As well as recognising the relevance of physical exercise and functional recovery, he also co-founded a mental health charity 16 years ago. This unique service provides direct access, psychotherapy, and EMDR for PTSD for his patients. Having paddled the Devisers to Westminster canoe race multiple times, he is the perfect choice to support this team on a medical, psychological, and practical capacity. Welcome to the World Extreme Medicine podcast, Barry.
Thank you for having me, Lauren. Lovely to see you.
Yeah, good to see you again too. Strange not being in the same house, but
yeah. For the benefit of those listening, we've probably ought to point out that we are father and daughter.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah. This isn't the first time you've been involved with World Extreme Medicine, is it, Dad? Barry?
No, I met Mark after a long time not seeing him. Mark Hannaford was in the military with me, and I've also got a connection who went through Ridgway and Hobson, who I worked with at our medical practice many years ago as well. So they got me interested and sort of dragged me toward, well, actually it was an easy drag. This just pointed me in the direction of where and here I am.
Yeah. And I'm right in thinking that you're going to be a speaker at the conference in 2023?
Yeah, we're booked in for the team to come and do a presentation at the conference in November at Edinburgh, and also to run a few workshops, possibly along with Nikki, looking at specifically in the workshops at logistics and medical planning for expeditions, as there is quite, as we noticed when we were planning for this, there's quite a gap in gaining information and the ability to get a template for a proficient medical planning document for an expedition like this.
Yeah, well, that will be very interesting. I hope to be there. So to start off the podcast, really, first question would be: could you start by telling us a bit about how your enthusiasm for sport started?
I've always been interested in the sports side of things and always did a lot of sport, and it was something I didn't really think about until when I was paralysed when I was about 18 and then went to Headley Court. You could see the way the rehab at Headley Court, the Defence Services Rehabilitation Unit, was completely focused around a very active recovery, and that was incredibly helpful on a physical capacity, but it took many years for me to realize actually how reassuring and rewarding it was in terms of a psychological ability to recover from things. And that's apparent, nowadays. You can see it in the EMDR and people who can use sort of bilateral stimulation in exercise as a way of coping and talking about any sort of trauma or loss. In actual fact, the EMDR is the same as exercise. What it's doing is bilateral stimulation to allow you to cognitively stay in the present moment while you talk about something that's difficult emotionally. So it's a win-win on both sides, both physically and psychologically.
Yeah, that's really important, I think, for everybody to be aware of. And that leads into the team Forces of Nature. Could you tell us a bit about that and how it came to be?
It was born out of an idea about 5 years, definitely pre-COVID, about 4 or 5 years ago, where Theo and Kale, two of the guys in the team, had rowed the Atlantic and were looking for another idea. And they decided a good one would be to kayak down the Amazon. But that was scuppered by COVID and by safety concerns. It's just not safe to do that anymore because of mainly the risk associated with drugs and the smuggling drugs in those areas. So they looked at a couple of other options, decided that the Inside Passage was a good challenge to do, although very, very different because it's not a river, it's exposed and sheltered coastal paddling, which is very different. And they formed a team to look at that. COVID again put the hold on that for 2.5 years, and then they were rapidly escalating logistics costs last year. So it's only just started this year with the guys actually feet on the ground in Seattle. They arrived yesterday, the first 5, and the other 3 of us go out next week with the hope that we will start paddling either on the 30th of April or the 1st of May.
That's very exciting. Been a long time coming, for sure.
Yeah. I was actually introduced to the team by Rich Wayne Hobson. He was the one who had been approached to try and find a doctor for the team. And he, I think he knew I was approaching burnout and needed something to focus on. And yeah, I'm eternally grateful to him for pointing me in the direction of the team.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've dedicated the last few years to this now.
Yeah.
And you spoke about the Inside Passage as the route. Where did that originate, really?
The story I've been given by the guys who looked at it was when it was decided that it was no longer safe for the team to do the Amazon, they came up with a number of options, and they sat down and looked at 3 or 4 options, and the one that they were keenest on doing was the Inside Passage. So it was well established before I got anything to do with the team about nearly 2 years ago. And so it was well established by the time I got involved.
So this team, you've talked a bit about a few of the members of it. You call yourselves, I think, it's the Forces of Nature. But how do you fit into the team? In what capacity are you in the team?
Given the medical requirements of the team and the isolated nature of the trip, it was decided that it would be appropriate to have a doctor on the trip with them, because 2 bilateral above knee amputation members in the team, one with significant abdominal injuries, one with significant head gunshot injuries, and one with PTSD, it was considered that a doctor would be appropriate given the isolated nature of the trip. But when the trip changed to the Inside Passage, you needed to have a doctor who was capable of paddling those distances as well. So it became more and more niche as to who would actually be able to do it. And the isolated nature of the trip meant it had to be somebody with either military or expedition experience as well. So they approached me, and it's just developed from there, really. But one of the big problems with that was when you start looking at how to do it safely. As I said earlier, there isn't really any decent template to go off to have a look at how do you plan for that, and what mitigation do you use to safely prepare for this trip. it's a difficult one.
Which actually leads nicely into my next question was to be, it's not only, you're not only a member of the team, you are the doctor. So what's that like, and probably very different to being just a member of the team from your other events?
Yeah, a lot of it is about the trust with the guys, because they need to have trust in your ability to look after them in any situation. So it's not just the resus situations or the major trauma situations. I think anybody going into a situation like this recognizes that we don't have a defibrillator, we don't have oxygen, we don't have IV fluids, we can't carry those sorts of things with us. But what we can do is try to maintain somebody in a major trauma situation. As the doctor, the main side of it would be psychological support, getting to know the guys before they go, and open and timely consultations during the trip to make sure that you're anticipating any potential injuries. The majority of problems that you anticipate on expeditions are actually primary care or exacerbations of already pre-existing conditions. They just have complex pre-existing conditions, but ones which they're particularly good at managing. So the skin prosthesis interface on amputees, the abdominal injuries, and somebody who's had their, significant number of gunshot injuries and blast injuries to their abdomen with the rectus abdominis having been resected, somebody with epilepsy from significant gunshot injuries to the head. How do you anticipate those problems, as well as the predictable musculoskeletal problems you're going to get from kayaking for 6 or 7 hours every day? And it's going through with the guys what you're capable of doing and what they have to do to prevent injuries, and tell me early if there is a problem. Yeah. So the majority of it is getting the guys to trust you, so that they'll actually tell you about what's going on, and then you can prevent injuries if they do that.
Yeah. So you're saying prevention in these sorts of trips, especially these massive expeditions, is the most important thing, really.
Yes. So if they can kayak properly, if they can look after the skin properly, if they can keep themselves well fed and well hydrated, then we should be able to prevent the majority of injuries. If the skills are good, then people won't get injured on landings and launches. If our drills are good, people won't injure themselves carrying the boats and carrying the kit, because on an expedition like this, we could be 12-day stretches without going into any times or anything. So you're on your own for up to 12 or 14 days, depending on the weather. The tidal ranges are very big there. So on some landing areas, if we don't land close to high tide, we could be carrying kayaks and kit 500 to 1,000 meters up to the camping area.
It's quite a long way, that.
Yeah, with the boats and kit weighing, each boat and kit weighing possibly 200 kilograms.
Yeah. A certain person needs to be doing these sorts of expeditions.
It's methodical. You just go through it methodically. Yeah.
So then, thinking about the expedition, as it's at sea, but the inside passage, kind of in the name, is around lots of little islands and inlets of land. How does that affect the way you've approached the planning document as a doctor?
The environment aspect is a very big part of any medical planning document. So you need to know about the environment you're going into. So we'll get very high tidal flows, so we have to be ready to paddle at different times of the day, so we avoid those high tidal flows. We have to find sheltered areas to land in behind islands, because we don't want to be surfing into a stony beach on a Pacific breaker. Otherwise, you won't have a boat left at the end of it, and you potentially damage to the paddler as well. There's a significant amount of rainfall, which we have to take into account. So yeah, researching all of that to make sure we've got the right kit and the right kit, the right amount of food, and the right amount of medication to cope with anything along the road.
You've spoken a bit about the team before, but the veteran team, all with their own stories, as you've talked about. Talk us a bit more about the considerations that you've needed to take into account when planning for the expedition with respects to the other team members.
So that's, again, going back to, it's the same approach you'd use for almost anything, which is looking at pre-existing conditions. So any expedition nowadays, more people are getting involved with underlying medical conditions. Now, it doesn't particularly matter whether that underlying condition is an amputation due to a blast injury, or whether it's diabetes, asthma, COPD, whether somebody's got an underlying bowel condition or a foot drop or something. You know, there are many non-military related pre-existing conditions, and anybody listening to this who's involved with expeditions realizes that and the treatment of dental or psychological problems on any trip will take up more of your time and potentially be more of an issue than any major trauma. But that's exactly the same as in the military. Over 90% of conditions that are treated in any military situation are primary care issues. It's rarely the big exciting major trauma. It's usually the tedious little things which you're trying to prevent escalating. So it's the same thing, looking at, you know, if you're paddling or you've got somebody in a dry suit and he's got epilepsy and he starts fitting, how do you treat that? Because he's in a dry suit, you can't give rectal diazepam. So we carry, although we will have rectal diazepam, we'll carry buccal lamps, so buccal midazolam. So if I have to give it quickly, I can give it buccally. So that's some of the simple things we have to take into consideration. We're very lucky that the guys with the prosthesis interfaces, bilateral above knee amputations, they have both rode the Atlantic. So their ability to anticipate the impact from things like salt water, sitting in salt water all the time, they've been there and they know what to do about that. But their stump admin, as they call it, will take up for them 1 hour a day.
You've talked about the training that goes into this before, and the fact that everybody does need to do the training for the prevention. What was your involvement in the program for this trip?
Multiple aspects of it. So I got involved in the preventative aspects of looking at how to teach them to kayak properly. So with an efficient style so they don't end up with shoulder, biceps or wrist injuries. And then we set up a split schedule of first aid days or medical training days so that they knew where all the medical kit was, how to use the medical kit, how to get the bits that were needed, and what to do in terms of treatment of a hypothermia or a cold water immersion. And we had a walkthrough and talk through of all of that equipment, looking at how we would treat somebody if they actually experience one of those problems. And luckily, well, not luckily for the person that it happened to, but we had an instructor on one of our training weekends. So we had done training weeks in Sweden and in Cornwall and up in Anglesey. We did have somebody who collapsed on the water, lost consciousness on the water, and we had to do a full rescue, get that person onto land and a full resus scenario on the land for real. And the guys did a fantastic job on it. And the person was absolutely fine and is still fine. And so the systems we put in place worked. The equipment we had was appropriate to rewarm somebody and to successfully get them back to being okay within a few hours.
Thinking about that, I guess on a larger scale, and being overseas in Canada and America, what are some of the other protocols you've put in place for that? Are there people you've got in contact with about those emergency protocols?
Yeah, so that's the joy of having something like WEM around. So I was able to establish relationships with Canadian Coast Guards, Alaskan Medevac, some other people along the route. So we had a very good understanding of what our emergencies SOP would be. So every day before we go on the water, it will be made very, very clear. If something goes wrong today, we have to contact the emergency services using either VHF, cell phone, satellite phone, or we'll have to use PLBs. So there's a hierarchy that we will go through, and that will be made clear to every paddler on that day of how we will do that. So yeah, we've been very lucky in being able to be very precise about that and look at exactly who we need to contact and in what numbers we ring, how we establish a rescue or a medevac in whether we're in British Columbia, whether we're in Alaska, or whether we're in the southern section in Seattle, Washington.
Moving on to talk a bit more about the expenditure, I guess, of the expedition. With 2,000 kilometers being paddled in 90 to 100 days, that's a lot of calories being burned. What nutritional considerations and decisions have you made for the team?
As ever, Lauren, I like to make calculations and a little bit of mathematics into everything. So if you're absolutely right, you have to look at what needs to be eaten and how do you deliver that energy. And keeping hydrated and keeping well nourished is really important. We're lucky we've been sponsored by Exped Foods, so we've had a significant input from them in terms of supplying foods, and that's been fantastic. So that'll be a breakfast meal and an evening meal, each of them being about 800 calories. If we look at the energy needed for the day, we've split it up into basal metabolic energy required for paddling on average 6 hours a day, and then any other energy expenditure for around the camp. And we're estimating around about the 4,000 to 4,500 calories a day. So if you look at the two meals we've got, that's only 1,600 calories. So we've broken down things into looking at not only how much energy we need, but how can we get that? Because if you speak to anybody who's been involved in ultra events or anything, you get to a point where you just detest the taste of certain things. You go off sweet things. So we do have packet soups, we've got dried meat, we've got flapjacks, we've got chocolate, we've got nuts, salted nuts, trail mix. So, and we've split all of that down into quantities that we think will deliver the amount of energy needed per person per day. And that, we will be measuring people's BMIs after and try to estimate body fat before and after the trip. But it's a really difficult thing to do, because you do get to the point where you're probably just forcing food down because you have to, and you just don't like the taste of it, or you get fed up with it. And that can happen after 7 or 8 days. So any times we get to, I think everybody's going to be very keen to get something that tastes differently to what we've been eating. Yeah.
Maybe a burger or two, I'm sure.
Oh yes.
So we talked a bit about the environment before, but with the remote areas there will be a lot of flora and fauna that you guys have to be aware of. Have you, as the team doctor and as part of the team, planned for those potential dangers?
Yeah. So in the medical planning document, we've got a bit about all of those. So split it up into flora and fauna. We're lucky there isn't really much in terms of snakes there, because the areas will be slightly too cold, and it's a little bit more coastal than they would prefer. But yeah, there's on the water and off the water. On the water, we've obviously got the risk of orcas, whales, and there are other smaller sea mammals and things, but that wouldn't be too much of a problem. The main issue, bizarrely, is off the water, where we've got the risk of cougars, bears, both black bears and grizzlies. We've got the risk from plants. So one of the things I had to do was, if we look at the flora there, I had to provide pictures and descriptions of giant hogweed, spurge laurel, and devil's club, which are, reasonably benign looking plants, and ones that we might decide to clear so that we could get a camp area. But each of them will cause significant problems with significant toxins, and skin reactions to them. Giant hogweed, for instance, they actually diverted the building of a railway track, because they just couldn't clear the area, because all the workers were getting such significant skin reactions. We just had to stop it. Insects, another one. We've all got complete mosquito suits to wear, because there are some of the beaches where it would be unbearable if you weren't in a suit. We probably won't have many photos of those because it does look a bit weird. But yeah, it's all the sort of stuff you need, and you can find out about these talking to locals, and they'll warn you about it, but it is all researchable online as well. Have I missed anything there? No insects, whales, orcas, rattlesnakes, cougars, wolves. Got about wolves, but they're unusual. If we set up our camp area appropriately, we shouldn't have too much of a problem with wolves or cougars. The bears. I mean, the really weird thing about bears is everybody you speak to in America or Canada, everybody has a different view about what you should do if bears come anywhere near you. So, I mean, just the important thing is just very, very strict discipline about where you cook and food waste, and hoisting stuff up into the trees overnight. Not leaving anything in your kayak which smells, so only sealed, vacuum-packed food products in your kayak, or you will find your kayak destroyed in the morning, because the bears will rip it open to get whatever's in there.
That would not be a fun sight to wake up to.
Definitely not when it's 5 more days to a time. Yeah. A lot of gaffer tape to clear that one up. Yeah,
yeah, gaffer tape does wonderful things. This is a huge undertaking, and as a team, you're fundraising for the charity The Not Forgotten. Just as listeners and everything, is there anything we can be doing to support you guys?
Yes, there's the website, Team Forces of Nature, Kayak the Inside Passage. The Not Forgotten, is probably the least known military charity, but the oldest military charity. And we've had significant support from Invictus and Blesma. So Invictus, everybody knows. Blesma is the British Limbless Ex-Servicemen's Association, and each and every person's regimental charities have contributed and helped as well. So there's been significant support in the background for the wounded in service personnel, and we're trying to put some of that money back in to encourage people to come back out of where they are, either psychologically or physically, with their wounded in service issues. And yeah, if anybody can help donate something to the Not Forgotten or to the trip, that would be fantastic.
And on that note, you're about to leave. You're very close to leaving to go away to America to start this trip. What is something you are really looking forward to, something that might be terrifying you about it, and a little bit about why your motivation behind saying yes to doing this trip.
Wow, good question. The motivation to do it, the motivation for doing it was I knew I needed to do something different, and there was just a draw towards doing it. The most terrifying thing is that uncertainty, more about I've got a slight blank as to what I'm going to be like when I come back. I've had a very structured life for so long and haven't done anything like this. I've done lots of things, but it allows you to dip out and come back in and take up your life where it was before. I just don't know what I'm going to be like or what I want to do when I return from this, because, you know, it's a bit of a corny phrase to use, but it will be a life-changing trip. And by definition, it changes you. And I don't know what I'm going to want to do when I come back.
Is that also then the thing you're looking forward to most?
Yeah, it's exciting. It's a fine line between exciting and terrifying, isn't it? Yes, that probably is it. Yeah, that's the exciting bit. Is I know it's going to be enjoyable doing it, and I'm very happy sitting in a tent or in a campsite somewhere or paddling somewhere. I don't really get scared by big waves or horrible things like that, or falling into the water. Yeah, I get terrified by loss of control, which would be my big issue.
Well, thank you
and
so much.
A funny story about that. We did have a funny episode where there was a problem with our boats, and we were doing a rescue drill, and two of us said that we were really, really annoyed because, and one of the guys in the team says, "Well, why are you so annoyed about it?" And I explained it to him. So look, for about 3 or 4 minutes there, I wasn't in control of my boat. And he said, "Well, welcome to the last 4 years of my life," he said. So yeah, everybody has different aspects of control.
Completely. Well, thank you for talking to us on the podcast, Barry. It has been really interesting, and it has been really enlightening to understand all about this. We will hopefully put some links in towards all of the pages we've talked about. And I think an amazing expedition is about to go ahead, and good luck with everything for it, for you and the team.
Thank you very much. And thank you to Wem for giving me the inspiration to do it. And I look forward to speaking to you guys again soon along the trip, and seeing everybody at the conference.
Yeah, be good fun. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.